Well, good morning. Happy Valentine's Day. And welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Let's kick off the Friday broadcast with this, a big Wyoming wave. Yes, a wave from Wyoming. Then a wave, I assume, locally. And then two waves from Tennessee. Yes, nationwide, folks, nationwide on Frankly Speaking. Let's go to some viewer comments, and then we have a lot of breaking news to get to on the broadcast this morning. Comment from a viewer, pretty bad scores all around. Now, this is in reference to yesterday highlighting the graduation rates in some of the local school districts and comparing it to the budgets that we vote on each year, and they always increase. And what's interesting is the rankings were dismal in some situations, very troubling, and we tied it in with the Department of Education, and that will tie in with something we'll talk about today with Linda McMahon at that hearing. Continuing, though, too many days off, no consistency in schedule or standards makes a poor quality education. Hopefully change is coming. Yes, hopefully change is coming. Another wave. Look at that. We're starting off busy this morning. We're coming in hot. Comment from another viewer. Good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. Adding it. New York State gives licenses to illegals. If they get pulled over by the police cannot find any records on the illegals because New York State hides them. Not only this, but if ICE asks about a specific person, New York State contacts that person and tips them off that ICE is looking for them. Furthermore, if they have been convicted of a crime, they are released and so on. Can you believe it? This is yet another example of how New York State values criminals over honest citizens. Yes, it is, and that is why the Department of Justice and Pam Bondi are going after New York State, Governor Hochul, Letitia James, and the head of the DMV. We have a little bit of an update on that. Perhaps we'll get to later on in the program. So thank you for that. Breaking news last night, or I guess you would say early this morning. A Russian drone struck Chernobyl, the reactor's protective shell, according to Zelensky. A Russian drone with a high explosive warhead hit the protective confinement shell of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Kiev region during the night. Radiation levels have not increased, according to Zelensky and the UN Atomic Agency. Russian officials made no immediate comment, and it was not possible to independently confirm Ukraine's claim of Russian responsibility because it is such a breaking news story that happening. Again, this first reported around about 3:30 maybe in the morning. Zelensky said the drone strike damaged the structure and started a fire, which has been since put out. The International Atomic Energy Agency said the strike occurred at 1:50 a.m. local time. It said there was no indication of a breach in the inner containment shell. So that is a breaking story happening late last night, early this morning. Also, we learned that a plane carrying Secretary of State Marco Rubio to Germany was forced to return to Washington due to a mechanical issue. Everything is okay. He left a few hours later on obviously a different plane. Quote, this evening en route from Washington to Munich, the plane on which Secretary Rubio was flying experienced a mechanical issue, according to State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce. The plane is turned around and is returning to Joint Base Andrews. The Secretary intends to continue his travel to Germany and the Middle East on a separate aircraft. Okay, so we talk about the strike on Chernobyl, allegedly by Russia, according to Zelensky. Well, yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance, declared that the U.S. will consider sanctions and even military action if Russian President Vladimir Putin refuses to end the nearly 3-year-long war in Ukraine. Vance told the Wall Street Journal, and I quote, there are economic tools of leverage. There are, of course, military tools of leverage that could be deployed against Putin. Now, the possibility of sending U.S. troops to Ukraine is on the table, according to the vice president, if the Kremlin fails to negotiate a settlement to the war in good faith. Now, this comes in quite a contrast, and there's been some criticism of what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said when he was in Brussels on Wednesday. He was meeting with Ukraine allies, and he ruled out the possibility of U.S. boots on the ground in the war-torn nation. So this sounds like, perhaps in a light way, J.D. Vance kind of correcting the record. and showing that actual position. Again, P. Hegseth, new to the job. Hegseth insisted that any security guarantee given to Ukraine to prevent a return to war with Russia after a peace deal must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. The defense secretary later told reporters that what concessions will be made or what concessions will not be made will be up to President Trump. And it sounds like maybe J.D. Vance's response was in response to that. Vance's remarks come one day before a critical meeting between the Ukrainian President Zelensky and a U.S. delegation, which is expected to include the Vice President, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Keith Kellogg. And that will take place at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. The meeting is expected to center specifically on how to end the war. Vance said, "The president is not going to go in this with blinders on. He's going to say everything is on the table, let's make a deal." While Vance insisted that Ukraine maintaining its independence would be required in any deal with Putin, he refused to say how much of the country's territory currently occupied by Russia would be allowed to remain controlled by the Kremlin. Quote, there are any number of formulations, of configurations, but we do care about Ukraine having sovereign independence, said J.D. Vance. So again, and Vance also said President Trump could say, look, we don't want this thing. We might not like this thing, but we're willing to put it back on the table if the Russians aren't being good negotiating partners or there are things that are very important to Ukrainians that we might want to take off the table, he said. Now, Donald Trump took to Truth Social saying we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. If you recall. Now, Douglas Murray, we don't have time this morning because we have so much to cover to get to this piece, but Douglas Murray at the New York Post has, I'll kind of pose the question to you. He says, Trump wants peace and an end to the war in Ukraine. It's by far his toughest objective. Do you believe that is his toughest objective? He is right that the fighting has to stop, but actually finding a way to halt it will be one of the great tests of his presidency. Now, another, and this is I'm telling you, under the Trump administration, breaking news. We could fill the whole show with breaking news, I believe. But this coming in late yesterday as well, if you have not heard, scores of firings have begun at federal agencies, part of the DOGE initiative, of course. This coming from CNN. Terminations of probationary employees are underway at the Department of Education, referencing what we were talking about earlier with that viewer's comments, and the Small Business Administration. Federal employees and union sources told CNN, and we'll get into it in depth later on in the program when we focus on DOGE for a while. We have some other sources, not just CNN, don't worry. The probationary employee firings mark the first from the Trump administration as President Trump and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency aim to dramatically shrink the federal workforce. Until now, federal employees across all government agencies had only been placed on paid administrative leave. The move came the same day as a federal judge allowed the administration's deferred resignation program to proceed. That was about 77,000 federal employees took that offer, not wanting to return to the office full time. And I see that Jamie Dimon, on a completely different, not governmental necessarily comment, said that he's done with this work from home hybrid, that the return to office is going to stick. So this is kind of just like what we're seeing with DEI. The beginning of it started with Trump, and now others are saying, yeah, perhaps this was the right idea, ending DEI or ending, not ending, but encouraging return to work, or return to the office, I guess it's called RTO, return to office. And with that DEI, not to get on these side tangents this early in the morning, but did you see that Disney changed their disclaimers at the beginning of some of the old movies? If you recall, got progressively longer, and these messages of, some of these things are not culturally appropriate, and on and on. Now they have scaled back on that, and many in Hollywood and in the media are concerned that some of the owners and some of the bosses are starting to see the light. Now we know with DEI, and that's why DOGE focused on that so early on, very costly. It became really big business. So it's interesting to see when the domino effect, for lack of a better word, whether it is DEI or in this case, when it comes to return to office orders. So 77,000 employees decided, you know what? We don't want to go back to the office. We'll take that somewhere between 6 and 8 month severance. We'll start looking for new work. That's fine. And Elon Musk had said before Doge really started going to work, he said that could be an option because it's done respectfully. It's not just firing. It is saying, here, you have the right to accept this or not. But today we learn, again, about the termination of probationary employees underway at the Department of Education and Small Business Administration. That happening early this morning. A form letter sent to the Department of Education employees obtained by CNN informing them of their termination stated, quote, the agency finds based on your performance that you have not demonstrated that your further employment at the agency would be in the public interest. Oof. At the Department of Education, the firings have impacted employees across the agency, from the General Counsel's Office to the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services that supports programs for children with disabilities to the Federal Student Aid Office. Now, you'll notice, because this is coming from CNN, they focus on what is going to make people go, really? It's not about the overall bloat of the federal government. It's what they want to focus on, the things that they think will make you the most upset. The sources have said they've heard of dozens of employees who have been fired, but the full scope of the firings was not immediately clear because, again, this is very breaking news. The American Federation of Government Employees represents about 160 departments of education employees that fall under the probationary status. Letters similar to the Department of Education's notice of termination were sent to Small Business Administration employees. That was actually on Tuesday, if you recall. This was breaking news. The full scale of the firings at the agency was unclear as of Wednesday evening. We're going to talk, again, more about that in depth when we get into our, I guess you could call it, segment on Doge. But we do have, we have a lot of breaking stories. So why don't I take a break? We'll get to some of the other breaking stories. Again, I don't want to keep using that term, but I think it is important that you know that a lot of this just happened, such as the Russian drone strike on Chernobyl reactor happening. That's according to Zelensky, by the way, happening around 4 o'clock this morning, our time. But we do have, we're obviously going to talk about RFK Jr. being confirmed, what his plans are. We also have so much about cutting government waste that it's pretty much the lion's share of what we'll be talking about this morning. Maybe some New York State issues, but I'd love to hear from you. We got a lot of waves starting off this morning. Let's hear some comments. What do you think about RFK Jr.? What do you think about the scores? What a weird way of wording that from CNN. But scores of firings have begun at federal agency, breaking overnight. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning on this Valentine's Day. Nothing different on the program for Valentine's Day because we all show love every day of the year here on Frankly Speaking. A comment from a viewer regarding the downsizing of the federal government. It's about time they got rid of redundantly dead weight. Some of the talking heads said, I read it was someone from the former Obama administration saying, well, this is not what people voted for Trump for. Really? I think that was pretty clear. It was about cutting the waste, fraud, and corruption, and they have hit the ground running. But a judge has ordered a temporary reversal of Trump's administration freeze on foreign aid. We're going to see a lot of activity from activist judges. We've seen a lot thus far. Jonathan Turley saying the other day that it is, and I'm paraphrasing, actually shocking how the judges are really overstepping their bounds here. But a federal judge late Thursday, issued an order compelling the Trump administration to lift its 3-week funding freeze on U.S. foreign aid. Judge Amir Ali issued the order in U.S. District Court in Washington in a lawsuit brought by two health organizations that receive U.S. funding for programs abroad. In his order, Ali noted that the Trump administration argued it had to shut down funding for the thousands of U.S. agencies for international development aid programs abroad to conduct a thorough review of each program and whether it should be eliminated. The judge said that Trump's officials failed to explain why a blanket suspension of foreign aid programs was necessary before the programs were more thoroughly reviewed. So that, again, a story from overnight. We are going to see a lot of activism from judges. Prepare for it. I think Donald Trump was prepared for it. If you recall, in between election and inauguration day, we had reports right here on this program about how from last term he was prepared with lawyers, prepared for the pushback from activist judges. So I think that's why you're seeing, especially in the instance of the severance pay, if you will, for federal employees, that was reversed relatively quickly. A story that you may have missed, but very important to mention because it affects us locally. We're so divided in this country. There's so much anger towards Trump and Elon Musk by people that didn't like Trump from the beginning, but don't want to see this kind of cut and this kind of focus on government waste for whatever reason. Well, yesterday we learned the scary fact that a suspicious package was delivered to Congressman Nick Langworthy's Clarence District office, a part, of course, the 23rd Congressional District. This happened yesterday morning. This is what the congressman had to say in regards to that suspicious package. This morning, my office received a suspicious package with a white powdery substance emanating from a manila envelope. Following standard protocol, we immediately notified local law enforcement and the Capitol Police and evacuated the office while the matter is still being investigated. The safety of our staff and visiting public is my top priority, and until our office reopens, we urge all residents who need assistance to contact our Washington, D.C. office or one of the other offices in Jamestown, Olean, or Corning. And so our thoughts are with the staff at Congressman Nick Langworthy's office. But when you see some of the rhetoric that has been being used by the media, by even elected politicians, Democrat politicians, it leads to unhinged people doing unhinged things. And it's why the rhetoric should be toned down, but unfortunately it just continues to be ramped up. Okay, so again, we are going through a lot of breaking stories this morning. We're then going to dive in deep to much of the Doge operations that are going on currently. If you are just joining us, it was learned early this morning that according to Ukraine President Zelensky, that a Russian drone strike hit the Chernobyl reactor's protective shell. Okay, yesterday, Trump's FBI pick, Kash Patel, did clear the committee vetting. So that means he now heads to the Senate for a floor vote, for the full Senate vote. Now, not sure where he stands specifically. This has been, well, you know how the media operates. They're all controversial. So far, though, and we're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. next, so far, really the most difficult confirmation was Pete Hegseth, who required J.D. Vance to come in to break the tie. Others have been, pretty much it's Mitch McConnell, if I'm being honest, and Donald Trump had some choice words for Mitch McConnell that we'll get to here in just a moment. But it's really been Mitch McConnell has been the fly in the ointment consistently. But FBI Director Designate Kash Patel cleared a Senate panel in a party line vote yesterday, setting up a final confirmation vote as soon as next week. All 12 GOP members of the Senate Judiciary Committee voted to advance Patel's confirmation, while all 10 Democrats on the panel opposed it. A former public defender, congressional aide, and national security official in the first Trump administration, Long Island native, Patel received firm backing from Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley for having undergone rigorous vetting and being committed to rooting out political bias at the FBI. Quote, Mr. Patel was instrumental in exposing Crossfire Hurricane. He showed that the Democratic National Committee funded false allegations against President Trump, that the DOJ and FBI hid information from the FISA court to wiretap a presidential campaign, and that an FBI lawyer lied in that process. As a reward for his effort to uncover the truth, he was attacked by the media, and the DOJ secretly subpoenaed his records. I know a thing or two about this kind of retaliation. My staff received similar treatment during our investigation. Senate Democrats, as you are aware, delayed the vote last week and have since accused Patel of perjuring himself and all these type of things. Senator Dick Durbin, the Judiciary Committee's ranking member, has alleged Patel falsely claimed not to be aware of the recent dismissal of senior FBI officials, but has been working behind the scenes after Trump took office. Other Democrats have pointed to Patel's statements denying involvement with the production of a song, Justice for All, sung by January 6 rioters held in federal prison, which Trump played at 2024 campaign rallies. Grassley shot back in his opening remarks. Before we even had a hearing, committee members called Mr. Patel dishonest, untrustworthy, lacking in character, a wolf at the door, a conspiracy theorist, a staunch political loyalist, and a nightmare. The purpose of this is quite obvious. Throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. And they are directed at a nominee who served his country during both Democrat and Republican administrations. The Judiciary Chair also said the FBI was badly in need of reforms and even firings, and that Patel was the right person for that job, pointing out that whistleblowers who spoke with Grassley's staff were retaliated against by the same Bureau officials who were recently fired. And this is kind of, and I know the media hates this term, they'll always say alleged, but this is kind of the deep state that needs to be cleaned up. We see that at the bureaucracy level with what DOJ is doing currently. This is an example where Patel can step in and really get in and root out the bad people, the people that have amassed this power, who are nameless, faceless bureaucrats that you never voted for, that are doing really dirty things. And that's why it's ironic that you have these protests and you have politicians like Chuck Schumer and others talking about it's a threat to democracy, or a constitutional crisis, because a man who was unelected, meaning Elon Musk, is rooting out powerful bureaucrats who were not elected. So a man is too powerful who wasn't elected because he's taking out powerful people that weren't elected. That equates to a constitutional crisis. I can't follow the line of reasoning either, but that is what the protests and the talking points from the left and from the media are recently. So that's good news. The first hurdle Kash Patel faced, he overcame that hurdle, leaves the committee, and now goes to the full Senate for a vote as early as next week. There should be no delay on the FBI director. It's been too long as it is. It'll be, well, looking at it mathematically, it'll probably be over a month from when President Trump was sworn into office. So we will keep you updated on that. When we come back, we're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. confirmed as a Health and Human Services Secretary. That and much more. I feel like we're just getting started, but we are moving along very fast. So stay with us. Keep those comments, keep those waves coming in, and we will be right back. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Sorry, I sometimes get distracted as I'm reading the comments. It is a little bit messy, as you saw on the roads out there, so please be careful on your way into school or your way into work. And we are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. Let's go to some viewer comments. It is crazy that the extreme left, extreme liberals, who make up less than 10% of the population, demand that the 90% plus cater to their demands. Yes, that is a common theme and has been for quite some time, but I agree it is frustrating. And that's why you see, well, we'll talk about it later. How's that? But I agree. Good morning, Frank. Hey, good morning. You are totally right that Democrats are in total distress, and they are going as far as telling veterans that Trump is giving them the middle finger. Yes, this is very fascinating to me, and I understand it, that things are moving so quickly in the Trump administration that by the time the Democrats come up with their talking point on one issue, there's been 10 other issues. They are so behind the eight ball that is now resorting to the constitutional crisis, the calls for violence and threats. It is It's very troubling, and they're going to go after everybody. They're going to say that, that these cuts are going to hurt, like you said, veterans or people on Social Security. That's not the case, but they have their bag of tricks that they've used for a long time, and we're seeing that playing out now. I don't think it's working. You look at Chuck Schumer, and he just seems lost on his message. Even people in his own party saying maybe it's time that he moves on. He's not the leader that he once was, because it's a brave new world in politics. It's a politics that isn't of Schumer's generation. And as you could see by that awkward protest where we will win, and raising up the hand of, I can't remember who it was that was on the stage with him, next to him, but his own party thing was embarrassing. You can't say we will win after losing in a landslide election in November. So I think there's a lot of people that weren't prepared for Trump. They thought it would be the Trump of 2017, which was kind of learning the game. No, Trump had, as I mentioned, someone told me this, and I thought it was a very good point. Maybe the 4 years of Trump being off was a blessing, because it almost gave him his sea legs to go in and go, okay, let's prepare for the next 4 years on what we'll do in our second term. And that is pointing back to what I had mentioned earlier, being ready to have the lawyers, because activist judges are going to try to block everything that he does. Or it's, let's get ready to make some major cuts, and not waiting 6 months in, a year in. Let's do it. I mean, folks, I know I stress this point a lot. We're less than a month in the Trump administration. Think of I don't know what, if we would call them breaking news from day one, the media would call it a scandal or controversial. But think of how much has been done and accomplished in that time. It is fascinating. Comment from a different viewer. Many in Congress are upset because they are being exposed for who they are and represent, and it is not us. They are not above the law and should be held accountable. And this viewer points to Ilhan Omar. She should be investigated for taking up calling for taking up arms. It should be investigated, and the viewer says, that would happen if the people were Republicans or conservatives. Yes, if the Republicans or conservatives use the language that high up Democrat officials have been using at these rallies, they would call it insurrection. They would call it really a threat to democracy. But in this case, it's all okay to say fight and go out in the streets and attack and these type of things. And it's being said by even those that you maybe in the past would have said were the grown-ups in the room, that you wouldn't agree, that's not Ilhan Omar, mind you, but others, like the Hakeem Jeffries, who you might say, well, he's in a leadership position, many considering him the future of the Democrat Party in that way. And even he was out there saying, we've got to fight in the streets. And I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember what his exact word is, but there has been many examples of that. But let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Sorry, I keep putting it off. He was confirmed yesterday. Senators voted 52-48 to place Kennedy atop the nation's health bureaucracy with oversight of a budget of roughly $1.7 trillion. Mitch McConnell opposed Kennedy's confirmation. We'll mention that in a moment, but it was every single Democrat. There was some speculation, myself included, but just as a fun kind of game in my head, would there be a Democrat that would vote because he is a Kennedy? Think of that. Think of how times have changed. You had a media that always wanted to prop up Camelot. Always, anything the Kennedys did was magical. I mean, look at what they did to cover up Teddy Kennedy. Numerous times, but Chappaquiddick being the most major. Because remember, after Chappaquiddick, he was still considered a presidential frontrunner and could have ran for president. Waited a little too long on that. But they have done everything they can from day one to protect the Kennedys. They put this almost mythical aura around the Kennedys. And then one of them decides, hey, Trump isn't that bad. Maybe I want to be a part of a movement that talks about making America great again. And that's when the long knives came out for a Kennedy. Never did I think I would see a day where the media would openly attack on a regular basis a Kennedy, especially in the lineage of Robert F. Kennedy I mean, it's not as if it's, a third cousin type thing. We're talking about the son of Robert F. Kennedy. Them going after him is something to be, well, you know what? I hate this term, but it's a learning lesson. It goes to show you, as soon as you leave the Democrat Party even a little bit, this is what happens. Look at yesterday on a much lesser level, but look at the criticism the media was throwing at Susan Collins yesterday, who they normally love because her and Lisa Murkowski normally vote against Republican interests, even though they are technically a Republican. But she voted in the confirmation. Who was it even for now? There's been so many confirmations. She went for, Tulsi Gabbard. That's right. Went for Tulsi Gabbard, and they turned on her. Look at Liz Cheney. Here's someone that the media loves, but when she was in office, if she did something conservative, they hated her, but then they love her again. And she is continuing to be used by the media because she pushes the anti-Trump narrative. I don't think there's any oomph behind her statements. I don't think she has any credibility, any really sway over anybody. If anything, she helped Donald Trump because there were so many Democrats that wouldn't vote for Harris because she hitched her wagon to a Cheney. They said, wait, you want me to vote for the party that is promoting a Cheney, who we were told were the most evil family, Darth Vader, et cetera, et cetera. We want to accept her endorsement and not look at Trump, who just received the endorsement of a Kennedy. I know that was a long tangent that I didn't mean to take, but I thought I didn't think there would be, but I thought it would be interesting if one Democrat said, you know what? I can't vote against a Kennedy. It goes against everything I've been told since I became a Democrat. But even Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, they backed him, making it a more easy path. But with any of this, I'm always, just like with Trump's election, I'm always cautiously optimistic. I always want to wait until it's all over, right? Like I had mentioned election night, Fox, who I trust, confirmed that Donald Trump was the president. They called it, but I wanted to wait and see when the left outlets started calling it. In this case, I didn't want to speculate on it until the votes were in. So there you are. Big news. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. confirmed as the Health and Human Services Secretary. What are your thoughts on that? Now, RFK signaled ending the childhood chronic disease epidemic is his top priority. We're going to talk about that when we come back, but I do want to just mention Mitch McConnell when we come back, because Donald Trump weighed in on Mitch McConnell and the vote against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being the HHS secretary. So stay with us. We will be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. As you see out there, a little bit snowy, so please be careful on your way into school, your way into work. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on this Valentine's Day edition of Frankly Speaking. How is it different than any other day? It isn't. Spreading the love every day. Okay, let's go to some viewer comments. Regarding Doge and the Democrats whining about the department, my thought is that the Democrats are afraid that Musk will find out that they have gotten rich under less than honorable means, that they are in fact dishonest criminals. Thank you very much. There does seem to be a lot of fear. I do have some quotes later on in the program that we'll mention of like Jamie Raskin and people like that and what they had to say about Doge, and it is pretty laughable how terrified they are. Comment from a different viewer. AOC should also be investigated and prosecuted for posting how to prevent ICE from reporting illegal aliens. She is no different than a child that just wants her way. She also should be investigated for the amount of money she is supposedly worth now. She was broke when she entered Congress. Now she's worth millions. Yes, AOC, and we'll hopefully get to that later on. I don't want to jump around too much, but she is coming under fire for posting tips on how illegal immigrants can evade ICE. One of the tips, she said, is do not open the door. And it was a post called Know Your Rights. There has been a lot of criticism on that. I would say it's very stereotypical of AOC. I would have been shocked if she had any other response. as a matter of fact. But I know people in her district are not too happy about it, but people in her district aren't happy with her in general. It sounds like a lot of her constituents complaining that she's never around. You know, she's a quote-unquote star. She doesn't have time for the people to vote for her. Comment from a different viewer. You reported Russia struck Chernobyl. Yes, well, Zelensky is saying early this morning that a Russian drone strike hit Chernobyl's reactor's protective shell. There's no comment from Russia, so right now that is just what we know, but it is a very much breaking story. But the viewer continues, how is the world supposed to watch how Putin said any strikes from Ukraine in Russia allows him to possibly use nuclear weapons? Yes, he had said, you know, if Ukraine strikes in Russia, then we basically say it's fair game for a nuclear weapon. But Russia is allowed to do whatever it wants, even hitting, allegedly, Chernobyl this morning. Where is NATO? What a joke NATO and the UN are. Absolutely. Very rarely do they prevent war. It has become a joke, unfortunately. And that's why, specifically you mentioned the UN, that's why I'm very encouraged that Elise Stefanik looks like she will be the ambassador to the UN because she is no nonsense. I thought that was a fantastic pick from Donald Trump. Elise Stefanik, if you recall, just the amazing job that she did during the hearings when it came to anti-Semitism on college campuses. All right, continuing a comment from a different viewer. This is coming from Mark. Hey, Mark. I can't wait to see Trump on Mount Rushmore. I definitely would visit it. Well, look, tourism going up already. I like it. You just made a lot of people angry saying that, Mark. That's why I think there's so many politicians saying it for fun. All right, so Donald Trump weighed in because he was asked about the fact that Mitch McConnell voted against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Also, just to point out, remember, he voted against Tulsi Gabbard as well. Well, Trump corrected, I believe it was Caitlin Collins, and he said other things about Caitlin Collins, which we'll get to here in just a little bit as well. But he said, he corrected her by saying he's not voting against Bobby, he's voting against me. If I didn't come along, the Republican Party wouldn't even exist right now, Trump said to McConnell. He's not equipped mentally. He wasn't equipped 10 years ago mentally, in my opinion. He let the Republican Party go to, we'll say heck. He had the ability to raise money because of his position as leader, which anybody could do, he told Caitlin Collins from CNN, then saying, you could do it even, to Caitlin Collins. And that says a lot. She said, that's what he said. That's what Donald Trump said, not me. He went after Caitlin Collins quite a bit, but yes, he could raise money because of his leadership position. You could even do it. That's saying a lot. But he raises a good point. I mean, Mitch McConnell, I know I've mentioned this a lot in the past, but he reminds me of the Republican, the version of Republicans that really led to Trump. And what I mean by that is, I've called it the Romney effect. It should really be called the Jeb Bush effect. But what I've pointed to for a long time is every 4 years we're told the only way Republicans can win, the only way Republicans can defeat Barack Obama is John McCain. And we go, well, he's too moderate. I mean, he's not even really a Republican. Why is that? No, it has to be moderate. It's got to be the big tent. We got to bring people in. And McCain loses. Romney. Well, he's a moderate. Look, he did something like Obamacare. We can figure out how to, use that talking point. He's moderate. We're going to get all these voters that wouldn't normally vote Republican. We're going to get them in the big tent, and he's going to beat Barack Obama. And he gets destroyed. Well, then it comes to Hillary Clinton, and Republicans are told the only way you can win is Jeb Bush. And that's when Republicans threw up their hands and said, you know what, maybe Trump doesn't stand a chance, but we can't keep going down this losing path. Let's give it a shot. And who was, by the way, the Republican of the Big Tent at the end of the day? It was Trump getting numbers from Hispanic voters, people of color, the numbers that we've never seen in the Republican Party in a long, long time. Not a lot better numbers than McCain, Romney, and Jeb would have got. Jeb didn't make it that far. But what I'm bringing up this whole tangent for is that Mitch McConnell is the kind of leader of the Republican Party that would have been the first to say, Romney is the only way we can win. Jeb is the only way we can win. So that's where that comes from. But I thought that was Quite a statement from Donald Trump. But as I mentioned, RFK Jr. signals that ending childhood chronic disease epidemic will be his top priority. He said, for 20 years, I got down every morning on my knees and prayed that God would put me in a position where I can end childhood chronic disease epidemic in this country. On August 23rd of last year, God sent me President Trump. That's when he ended his own bid and endorsed Trump. He argued that Trump's vision of restoring America's strength won't be possible with a weak citizenry as a result of the chronic illness. Sorry, tough word to say. 60% of our people are sick. 77% of our children cannot qualify for military service. So again, his goal, as he was confirmed yesterday, is to end childhood chronic disease epidemic. All right, your thoughts on the media attacking a Kennedy, your thoughts on a Democrat senators, not a single one voting for a Kennedy, and not just any Kennedy, the son of Robert Kennedy. Your thoughts on that? We got a couple updates and breaking stories to wrap up hour number one. Yes, it's already that time. We've got one more segment in hour number one. Keep those comments coming in, and we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We have a ton of comments. Thank you so much. Everybody's so active this morning. Let's get right to them to wrap up hour number one. About RFK Jr., I'm in hopes that he will ban all food dyes because many of them contain, if you can believe it, petroleum products which are known to cause cancer. Thank you very much. There's a lot of hope for the decisions because one of the things that people keep pointing to is that he's not beholden to the pharmaceutical companies. If anything, it's quite the opposite. Not a fan of pharmaceutical companies. Again, Mitch McConnell being the only Republican that voted against him. I've got to say, I'm not going to stop saying it. That Democrats, not one single Democrat voted for a Kennedy. When asked by a reporter what he would like to tell Democratic senators who voted against his confirmation, he said, whether you're in a blue state or a red state, I'm going to do everything I can to work with you, whether you are a Democrat or Republican, to restore child health in this country. Okay, comment from a different viewer. Trump's not prosecuting Eric Adams because he knows what is buried in the Manhattan DA office. Yes, I don't know if you saw that last night, and I'm not sure if you're following it, but the prosecutors were prepping to charge Eric Adams with destroying evidence, according to the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's resignation letter. Yes, resigning when the charges were dropped. We may talk about that a little bit later on. We'll see. I don't know. I don't know if we have time because we have so many comments coming in. More comments. Thank you. All right, continuing. Good morning, Frank. Hey. Good morning. Isn't it great to win every single day? All the left's attempts to stop Trump's nominees have failed. Yes, and I don't like to use this term, but I'm shocked really that all of them have been thus far have been confirmed. That's not to speak to their character. Just it gives you hope about some Republicans who in the past were wishy-washy, maybe seeing the light after the landslide election in November, realizing that maybe we should take a note from the Democrat playbook, which is to actually rally around each other and push an agenda that the American people wanted. Continuing, though, with what that viewer had to say. And what are the likes of Adam Schiff to do once Trump's positions are filled? They don't seem to have any skills that would make the media want to listen to them anymore. Well, I only disagree with you a little bit on that because I do think the media will always listen to someone like Adam Schiff because he has no problem lying and saying anything he wants about Trump. And that's why that hearing with Pam Bondi was so beautiful. He was not prepared for the brilliance of Pam Bondi, and he thought he had a couple gotcha moments, and she just turned it right around on him. And the real gotcha moment was because he was caught flat-footed. But I think the media will always give people like Adam Schiff the microphone because he's saying the things they want him to say, just like they'll always give a Republican that badmouths a Republican time on the air. But what is he to do? I don't know. He'll probably be blustery and showboat on some of these hearings. But I am with you. No longer relevant, in my opinion. And the fact that, again, the confirmation thus far of every single nominee is just remarkable. If I would have bet on it early on, I don't think I would have bet that RFK Jr. would have got it. That's just being honest. Okay, comment from a different viewer. Shouldn't members of Congress be held accountable for outright lying? If we were to lie at work, we would certainly be held accountable, possibly fired. What happened to their oath? Ethics? By the way, good morning, Frank. Hey, by the way, good morning to you too. You raise a good point. I guess the argument would be, they would say, well, Trump lies all the time. You go, well, no, he doesn't. I mean, that could be a very misused rule. I would say if they lie, vote them out is maybe the best way to do it. That would be firing them. But I'm with you when it's an outright lie, like going back to Adam Schiff with what he was saying about Russia. Yes, there should be censorship. There should be looking at, being booted out of office, like George Santos was. So there is mechanisms there, but not used enough, or, could it be misused? That would be a problem too. So I don't really have an answer for you, but I will say good morning as well. And I really appreciate the comment, because you would like to see them stick to their oath and be honest, wouldn't you? I would. Ken writes in, look at these waves. My goodness, everybody. Thank you. Ken writes in, the Democrats going against RFK Jr. is just another confirmation that you either toe the party line or you're going to be ostracized. Absolutely. That's why this is one Kennedy, and it's not some outlier Kennedy. This is one Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy's son, who is no longer liked by the media and the Democrats. Why? Because he had the audacity to say he wants to make America great again. It is. It's proof that they all rally around each other. And we're starting to see that a little bit more from Republicans. Will it last? Time will tell. What am I missing here? Why are there so many waves coming in right at the end of the hour? But back to what you're 100% on the nose, Ken. The guy to watch is Fetterman. He has got to be next in line for the Democrats to punish. Yeah, that's going to be interesting because he has went against the party line, but he's toed it in certain instances. And if you look, he's been pretty adherent to the Democrat cause. They might have already got to him because after one or two confirmations, he started to fall right in line with Democrats again. And I can't remember who it was that he actually ended up supporting, but he might have been. He'll say a couple things and kind of keep his brand, but I have a feeling they've gotten his ear so far. Ken continues, Mitch McConnell is not running again in 2026, and the Democrats have promised him something if he does a Liz Cheney, a book deal, guest Republican on the legacy media circuit, or something else to feather his bed, as long as he doesn't help Trump. I agree. You could tell that now he's a quote-unquote lame duck. You're starting to see the real Mitch McConnell. This was the Mitch McConnell, by the way, that was working behind the scenes the whole time to make the Republican Party more of a rhino party. But you're right. He'll think of it. He did this the other day. Was it on a Sunday show a couple weeks ago, where he said how he doesn't like Trump and that type of thing, and it got a whole bunch of attention. So he's already kind of received that pat on the back, obviously receive the wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Don't help Trump, and also make sure that you try to work against Trump as much as possible, and you will be rewarded let me try again. You will be rewarded justly. Sorry about that. Tongue-tied. Hey, we got to go. Hour number 1 in the books. Hour number 2 on the way. If you are just joining us, the news broke early this morning that a Russian drone strike hit Chernobyl's reactor protective shell, according to Zelensky. All right, we're having a blast on this morning's show. Thank you for all the waves. Thank you for all the comments. Keep them coming in. I'd like to do a whole show worth of comments if you want to. We've got a couple other breaking stories that we're going to dive even more in depth with Doge, so stay with us. Hour number 1 in the books. Hour number 2 mere moments away. Hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking on this Valentine's Day edition. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you for joining us. We've got a few more comments to get to and then a couple of major stories this morning. All right, first up, happy Valentine's Day, Frank. Well, thank you. Thank you and good morning. Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. In reference to the reduction in government employees, and this is Fred, by the way, In reference to the reduction in government employees, I keep hearing the term probationary employees. Yep. I assume that implies recently hired people, members of the pajama brigade that has never been required to work full-time in the office. Yes. I think that's what, I mean, that would only make sense time-wise, right? Timeline, what's probationary? Normally, 6 months maybe? So, yes, it would have probably still been a work-from-home type of job. They've never been required to work full-time in the office. Yes, the Biden administration has cooked the books for years on job creation, with massive government hiring being included in the monthly numbers, many times being higher than private business jobs. Trimming those numbers back is absolutely necessary. The highest income countries in the country surround the highest income counties in the country surround the D.C. area, where they manufacture nothing but regulation for the rest of the country. Great point, Fred, and you are exactly right. If you look at the map of the highest income, it is like a red circle around Washington, D.C. You're exactly right. Comment from a different viewer. I appreciate the comment. I'm starting something. Frank Acom for governor 2026. Thank you. I liked your Trump on Mount Rushmore idea better. But I see you're trying to rile things up here this morning, but thank you very much. It's much appreciated. I think there are much better candidates. We got other comments coming in. We'll get to those in just a little bit after the next break, but keep them coming in. We've got a lot of great ways. We're having a lot of fun this morning. Did you see that Mexico has threatened Google with legal action over the Gulf of America name change? Yes, we're still talking about the Gulf of America name change. Mexican President Sheinbaum said Thursday that her government wouldn't rule out filing a civil lawsuit against Google if it maintains its stance of calling the stretch of sea between northeastern Mexico and the southeastern United States the Gulf of America. That's what you want from your presidential leader. Lawsuits. Okay, I mentioned Caitlin Collins earlier. Let me just go through a couple media updates to get your blood boiling at 7:03, and then we get in the Doge. So you remember the first Trump term, he got very heated with the media, to put it lightly. We've seen a little bit of that, but not as much as we did back in like 2017. That may be over. President Trump skewered Caitlin Collins. Caitlin Collins was, I think she wasn't a part of a debate, was she? She was on the Trump town hall, maybe. She works for CNN. Trump skewered her so much that even got laughs from other journalists, which is not typical. Because if you remember when it was Jim Acosta, he would attack Jim Acosta, but the rest of the media stood there silently. With this one, it was so funny that even her peers laughed. This was during media availability in the Oval Office yesterday. Trump knocked the cable news network's credibility and claimed Collins was buddy-buddy with Joe Biden after the reporter yelled out a question about Vladimir Putin. Trump was answering another question of whether Putin truly wants peace with Ukraine when Collins cut in. I believe he wants peace. I believe that President Putin, when I spoke with him yesterday, I know him very well. Yeah, I think he wants peace. I think he would tell me if he didn't. I think he'd like to see peace. That's when Collins interjected, "Do you trust President Putin?" She wasn't called upon. The president shot back saying, "I know Biden is a friend of yours." He's a friend of CNN. That's why nobody watches CNN anymore, because they have no credibility. He's not wrong. If you look at the numbers of CNN, the old joke is that the only time people are watching CNN is when they're stuck in an airport, because they seem to be on every TV in the airport. But they have lost so much credibility along the line with their attacks on Trump. It even costing them so much money that I guess you'd call the CEO maybe of CNN, saying Jim Acosta doesn't have a show anymore. Jim Acosta was essentially made famous because of his attacks on Trump in the first term. So to oust him as Trump starts his second term is very telling about the money hemorrhaging. So saying that you have no credibility. Several in the room broke out in a light chuckle at the insult. Now, Collins is a veteran of Trump insults, as the CNN anchor is known for asking incendiary questions to the commander-in-chief. Yes, her questions are very much loaded. Every time she has talked to Trump, you see that hate, that disdain that she has for him in her delivery style. If you recall recently at that one press conference, he said to her, "I think that's not a very smart question. I'm surprised coming from you." And as I mentioned earlier with Mitch McConnell, when it was said that when he was talking about Mitch McConnell and he said, well, he was in a leadership position. That's why he raised so much money for the party. Anybody could do that. You could even do that, Caitlin Collins, and that says something. But tying in with the media, just to show you the anger and the rage and the hate that so many in the media have for Trump, listen to this. I missed this, and I've got to be honest, it came on Monday. But this is a part of the New York Post. They do the weekend whoppers, and there may be things that you missed. So I want to give full credit to New York Post. I look forward to that each week. But the American Prospect released an article on Monday that actually was titled, "What Trump Could Learn from Hitler on NIH Funding." As the New York Post said, leftists spent the entirety of the 2024 campaign outrageously and baselessly comparing Donald Trump to Hitler. And now they want him to copy Hitler? In this sociopathic piece, Robert Kuttner claimed the Trump team slams the Trump team for capping overhead costs for NIH research grants, arguing that even Hitler knew to support German science. This is beyond deranged. This is how far, I know the term is used, Trump derangement syndrome, but this is how far their hate and their anger and really at this point weirdness has become for Trump. Note to leftists, you do not under any circumstances gotta, quote, hand it to Hitler. That is sick. That is how, well, I guess that's what happens when they throw that around so much that Trump was going to be Hitler. You throw it around that the word loses its meaning, and that's despicable. That's another despicable reason to not just constantly throw that around. Another media update, CNN's Brian Stetler said a year ago you could go days without seeing or thinking about Joe Biden. Now you're lucky if you can go hours without thinking about President Trump. I had mentioned this. It's very much like the employees that took the severance pay because they didn't want to return to work because they'd been out for 5 years. They've been working from home. They didn't want to go back into the office. It's very much like the journalists who didn't really have much of a job while Biden was in office because Biden was hidden everywhere. They didn't want him to have any media access, so the media just kept going to the White House and getting nothing. So they don't want to return to work, and Brian Stetler is whining about it. Americans would go days without seeing or thinking about Joe Biden. Think about that line. Why? Because his team, we learned, was actively hiding him from the public with help of the lapdog media like Brian Stetler to cover up his mental decline. People like Brian Stetler, people like the folks at CNN who would actually call you a conspiracy theorist if you thought President Biden wasn't sharp as a tack. So it's very telling what he says there. All right, and then a piece that I saw on Drudge Report this morning, Sleepwalking into Tyranny, How Power is Silently Being Seized. It's one article after another. The anger over Doge, the anger over Trump. We brought up earlier this morning, and it was a breaking story from very early this morning. Thousands have been fired in the United States government as Trump and Musk purge the federal workers. How much have you been seeing lately, depending on what outlets you go to? They're trying so hard to get under Trump's skin in the media by saying, and Democrat Party, it's really their talking points, too. One is constitutional crisis, which, as we had that piece yesterday that shows that Democrats have lost all credibility when they use terms like constitutional crisis. But also they try to say it's President Musk, because they think it's like taunting like a child, because they think that's going to get under Trump's skin, where actually Lawrence O'Donnell went as far as saying that was the most powerless presidential photo in history, where Trump was at the Resolute desk and Musk was behind him answering questions. I pointed out yesterday, I think that you can point to numerous powerless photos of Biden during his 4 years that were much more powerless, if you even want to consider that Trump photo powerless, which I still don't quite understand. But that's how deranged it has become. So they're trying to get under Trump's skin with this President Musk idea, and it's just not working, and it's driving them crazy. But yesterday, the firings, if you will, have accelerated. The purge on America's bureaucracy has accelerated. The Department of Veterans Affairs, which provides health care for veterans, said it had to let go more than 1,000 employees who were in their probationary period, while the U.S. Forest Service was set to fire more than 3,000. Now, again, to Fred's point, when you talk about probationary employees, that's someone that was recently hired under the Biden administration. So let's say that those 1,000 or 3,000 were actually necessary. Let's have them be under Trump's watch and not the Biden watch, who may not have the same interests at heart. Termination emails have been sent in the past 48 hours to workers across the government, mostly recently hired employees still on probation at agencies such as the Department of Education, the Small Business Administration, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and the General Services Administration, which manages many federal buildings, which is interesting because we've talked about the federal buildings sitting there empty because so many people were working from home and the waste for taxpayers. Trump and Tesla's CEO, Elon Musk, their overhaul, the federal government, appear to be widening as Musk aides arrive for the first time at the IRS. And there was a piece at the Hill. A Democrat senator said DOJ is now at the IRS. Presenting that as a negative. I don't know too many people in my life, maybe you do, that think the IRS needs to be more powerful, that the IRS needs more agents, that they, maybe couldn't be cut back a little bit. So did that scare you? Did that send a shiver down your spine when you were told that DOJ is now at the IRS? But that's going to be an interesting one. So they just entered, the cavalry has just entered the IRS. And U.S. embassies were also being told to prepare for staff cuts. This is happening quickly, folks. The federal government has some $36 trillion in debt and ran a $1.8 trillion deficit last year. And there's bipartisan agreement on the need for government reform. But critics have questioned the blunt force approach of Musk, who has amassed extraordinary influence in the Trump's presidency. So this is even coming from an outlet, the New York Post, that is more Trump-friendly. But even them finding this criticism, trying to push this idea that it's happening too fast. Is that a problem? According to government data, about 280,000 civilian government workers were hired less than 2 years ago, with most still on probation, which makes them easier to terminate. 280,000. But firings at the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau appear to be going beyond probationary employees. Notices went to dozens of term employees, full-time workers who have contracts with end dates. Those firings come after the Consumer Protection Agency terminated as many as 70 probationary staff members. Meanwhile, the U.S. Forest Service was set to fire 3,400 probationary employees at all levels of the agency. I have to just quickly say, we're not going to go through every single cut, which is amazing. We don't have time for every single cut. What I will say, prepare yourself for this to be used against Trump in an untruthful way. Anytime, let's say there's something wrong in a forest, let's say some glitch goes on at the IRS and your checks don't come in a timely fashion, whatever. They're going to say, because he cut. They've been saying that already. They tried to blame him for the airplane crash at Reagan International Airport, the helicopter airplane crash. So this is just something to prepare yourself for, because as we know, the powers that be, the deep state, really do not like cuts in the federal government. We're learning that at a record pace. So just keep that in mind. When we come back, we'll tell you about what the Democrat senator had to say about DOJ at the IRS, and we'll read your comments because we got a ton of them. Ooh, and a couple more waves coming in. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live. I'm just putting together all of the comments this morning. Thank you so much. We're having a blast on this Valentine's Day. Thank you for all the waves. Got another one there. All right, let's go to viewer comments. Wow, there's a lot of them. Adam Schiff wasn't fired for lying. He was actually promoted from a 2-year congressman to a 6-year senator. You're right. The reported net worth of senators implies that any of them could retire at any time and live happily ever after for generations. Thanks, Fred. No, you're right. It's frustrating. You look at his district and in that case his state, and that's what they wanted. They wanted someone to, doesn't matter if it's truthful or not, go after Trump. Steve Garvey, I was really hoping he could pull that race out, but it just wasn't in the cards. Next up, when Obama reduced federal government, did people cry this much? I'm not sure what you're referencing. I mean, with Obamacare and like that, I don't believe he reduced the federal government, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'd like to hear exactly in what areas you are speaking of. Comment from a different viewer. As to the probationary government employees, my wife managed several departments in a local government facility for several years. The employees on probation were new employees and had no union protection, which was actually one of the few things that the government did right. Once an employee has a union backing them, it was nearly impossible to fire an underperformer. Yes, and we've heard the horror stories about almost like in schools with the tenure, but when the union has their back, doesn't matter how much they underperform. So thank you for that. But yes, that's why they went for the easiest to fire now, but it sounds like they're starting to expand on that as well. Next up, if they, this is from a different viewer, if they're calling Trump Hitler, then they are the devil in disguise. The Democrats are the ones that have caused the problem with America, and Trump is only trying to clean it up. I agree. Comment from a different viewer. I am sick and tired of one party always trying to sabotage the productivity of the other instead of working together for the best interest of our country. Yeah, but you can't have a party that has been full of hate against Trump now for, a decade, be seen working with him. That's why, to Ken's point earlier on, you're probably going to see the long knives come out over Fetterman. I mean, for heaven's sakes, they're not going to work with Trump if they couldn't vote, if one Democrat senator couldn't vote for a Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy's son, no less. So I wouldn't see too much cooperation in the future. But that's why it was so important to get the House and the Senate for Republicans. That's why it was a landslide victory in November. Comment from a different viewer. That the Democrats would suggest that President Trump is Hitler goes hand in hand with their anti-Semitic views. But when they turn around and suggest the president should copy Hitler's views regarding healthcare is so hypocritical, it is almost laughable. What a bunch of clowns. They should get out of politics and start a circus. Thank you very much. I think it is hypocritical. Obviously, it's hypocritical, but I think it's disgusting. And I also think it shows what happens when you go to the farthest extreme and keep pushing it and keep pushing it. It dumbs it down to where you can throw the term using anyone or anything, and it's despicable. It really is. And that's, if you're just joining us, that was in reference to an article, I think at the American Spectator, right, earlier this week. Okay, comment from a different viewer. Morning, Frank. Well, good morning. Very sad that the church in Elmira burned, the one next to Wisner Park. It is very sad. That was the former First Baptist Church. Yes, I'm glad that you mentioned. I wanted to mention that earlier in the program. So thank you for, we get so much breaking news. So I'm glad that we could mention that. And it is very, very sad. So thank you for refreshing my memory. Comment from a different viewer. Is it okay for Soros, a millionaire Democrat, to call the shots? Creating wasteful, you raise a good point. That's why when they keep talking about dark money, didn't Joe Biden on his way out the door give that Medal of Honor to George Soros? So it's hard to take them serious when they're talking about Musk, isn't it? But continuing with what the viewer had to say, creating wasteful programs that seemingly enrich party members and backers, but Musk is a problem for reducing government and calling out waste. Yes, they liked enriching party members and backers. They liked the bureaucracy where all this money that, like we're learning about, them throwing gold bars off the Titanic, as we mentioned yesterday, Lee Zeldin was saying. They want that. They want that misuse of taxpayers' money because there's a lot of people making a lot of money. As it was Lee Zeldin talking about the no oversight, essentially, of $20 billion that the Biden administration funneled through Citibank so that there would be opportunities that they could still use that $20 billion, these various organizations, to push Biden's agenda. So, yes, thank you for that. Yes, Musk is the problem for trying to reduce government and calling out waste, which is very ironic. And also, it's scary that a non-elected powerful man is putting our country in a constitutional crisis because strong, powerful bureaucrats that were not elected are being fired. Ken writes, The next ploy that the Democrats and deep state will use to show how bad Trump's policies on saving taxpayer money are is a huge slowdown of all government services. Yeah. They will endlessly blame Trump for the slowdown because he got rid of just too many dedicated government employees that were working hard to keep up with the demand. You're right, Ken. That will be a ploy that the media specifically uses because it's easy. Look, Politico, who again, they're one of the organizations that will say alleged deep state. Politico, before the election or before the inauguration, said, make sure, basically to the bureaucrats that are now getting fired, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, make sure you do everything you can to gum up the works for Trump. So admitting there's a deep state. So yes, to your point, that's what they will do. They will try to spin everything as negative. Hey, our neighbor's blowing off our snow. Thank you, neighbor. That's very nice of him. But yeah, that's it. I just say that if you hear the noise in the background. I can see the ways that they're going to try to spin this, not truthfully, but try to spin this to make people feel like Trump's he went too far. I mean, we needed these organizations. It's just like that article I mentioned with CNN. They talk about the cuts in the Department of Education, which are the main focuses that they talk about. Special education, rehabilitation. And there's a lot more than that. But they want to focus on the ones like they always do. Or like the one viewer had mentioned, I can't remember who it was, mentioning that they're trying to suggest he's going after veterans. Cutting the bureaucracy is not going to slow down the services. But you're right, Ken. I think that's probably the area they'll go down first. They'll say, well, veterans, look what he did. He's never had respect for veterans. You know, you can see it already. You're exactly right. Comment from a different viewer. In contrary to the reports that Trump is moving too fast with cuts, so what is he supposed to do? Move at Joe Biden's pace? We'll never see a change. Very good point. Wow. That whole segment dedicated to viewer comments. Thank you for that. Everybody's talkative this morning. I appreciate it. We'll have a few more when we come back, and then we'll talk more about Doge. And we have the, again, breaking story from early this morning that a Russian drone hit Chernobyl, but there was a fire that was put out. It doesn't look like it did any sort of damage in the sense of when you hear Chernobyl, but that's coming from Zelensky. So that was breaking early this morning if you missed it. Some more comments coming in when we get back, and then Doge. A few New York State updates from yesterday's program. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. We will be right back. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on this Valentine's Day edition of Frankly Speaking. You can feel the love on this Valentine's with all the comments coming in and all the waves coming in. I appreciate it. Let's go to a few viewer comments. Good morning, Frank. Climate Fact Friday from Bob. Well, hi, Bob. I wonder why the mainstream news weather experts never mention, all right, I'm going to try. Don't laugh at me, Bob, quasi-biennial oscillation, or, as I call it, the QBO, is the biggest driver of weather on Earth. The QBO is a massive jet stream that exists in the stratosphere above the equator. It changes from east to west and back to west to east biannually. To really understand climate change, you must first be knowledgeable of the Earth's natural forces. Perhaps the QBO is just too big to rig. Thank you very much. That was interesting. I appreciate that. That's our Climate Fact Friday. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for making us all a little bit smarter this morning. Next up, speaking of powerful unelected people running things, there's a long list on the Democrat side as well, including Gates and Soros and other assorted globalists. Yeah, think about the fact that Kamala Harris, with what was 107 days that she had to run, raised almost $2 billion. So to have this fear of Musk and the money involved is a little disingenuous when they've had the Soroses of the world for so long. So I agree. Comment from a different viewer. With daylight savings time coming up soon, oh, that's right, it is. Is there any more information about whether or not Trump is going to do away with it? That is a big question. And I've seen some research on this, and it is generally not known. And what I mean is they're actually taking bets at certain markets on whether or not he'll do it. Could it be by executive order? Could they push it through? So looking up the betting market on this, betting odds show just an 11% chance that Trump eliminates daylight savings time within the first 100 days. So if you go on the betting markets, it looks unlikely. But time will tell, because let's face it, I never thought we'd be discussing the takeover of Gaza or the Gulf of America or getting rid of the penny or et cetera, et cetera. So, yes, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. Sorry. A Democrat senator says Doge is now at the IRS. Ron Wyden sounded the alarm. Now, does that sound like an alarm to you? Does that sound like a negative towards you? Are you one of these people that have always said the IRS is untouchable, that they're pure as a fresh driven snow? This seems like a losing battle for Senator Wyden if he's trying to scare people. My office is hearing that Doge is now at the IRS. That means Musk's henchmen are in a position to dig through a trove of data about every taxpayer in America. And if your refund is delayed, they could very well be the reason. So that is, you can see, kind of proactive there, because all it'll take is yours to be maybe a week longer than you were hoping for bills, and they will then that seed has been planted in your head that it's Musk's fault. But there is another thing that we've learned since Doge has somewhat taken over, and it's probably the wackiest bit of information about the government yet. Doge revealed that, quote, federal employees' retirements are processed using paper by hand in an old limestone mine in Pennsylvania. And when I heard him say that at the press conference, I thought it was just kind of not even an anecdote. What would you call it? Just kind of a joking about an extreme. But during that briefing, Musk gave more details, explaining that the clunky, decades-old system means that the most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. The speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government. Again, I thought this was just a Musk-ism, that it was just him being kind of outlandish to show how bad things are, but it's real. And when the elevator breaks down, nobody can retire. Doesn't that sound crazy? Somehow the retirement mine, folks, buckle up, if you didn't know this, is completely real. In the underground facility at Iron Mountain in Boyers, Pennsylvania, 700 plus federal workers manually process each and every retirement filing on paper, which can reportedly take months, and store the paperwork in manila envelopes and cardboard boxes. Since 1987, Uncle Sam has dumped some $130 million into multiple attempts to digitize the process, somehow failing every time. Well, because there's job security and the people that know the system. Eventually, the feds gave up, which is not the right reason, and that is why the feds continue to give up, and that's why we have so much bureaucracy that Doge is trying to cut, because instead of fixing the problem, it's easier to ignore the problem. Opting to put up with one more insane inefficiency. Now, just because Doge is flagging this madness doesn't mean it'll end. How many more limestone mines are out there? So that is an actual scenario, folks. He was not just joking, if you will. But to prove, I think, or maybe disprove the media's reaction to Doge, suggesting that it's some kind of shady organization, that it's a negative, Doge has actually launched a website to be, quote, maximally transparent with taxpayers. Now, this comes off the breaking news that we brought to you this morning that happened late last night, where there has been the letter sent out to fire numerous employees in numerous different government agencies. Right now, mainly focused on probationary employees, those you could say easier to fire. But the Department of Government Efficiency has launched its official website in an effort to be maximally transparent, sharing its most recent findings of bureaucratic waste in a live feed. Almost immediately after the left-wing tech publication, Gizmodo published a piece claiming that the billionaire Tesla CEO is a fountain of lies. That's what they put in their article, because the Doge.gov landing page was empty, despite a constant stream of updates coming from the Doge X account. The website went live with a breakdown of federal employees and regulations. The homepage takes users to a live feed of the X account's detailed posts on savings, while the unconstitutionality index page shows a number of agency rules created by unelected bureaucrats for each law passed by Congress in 2025. And each rule was average was 18.5. That was created by unelected bureaucrats. Their words, but also factually accurate. It also broke down federal regulations by agencies, with the Department of Agriculture coming out on top with more than 21,000 sections of regulations, followed closely by the Environmental Protection Agency with more than 20,200. And we know that Lee Zeldin, former gubernatorial candidate, will be taking that over. So appreciate that. Appreciate that selection by Trump. A webpage for the savings found by the department states that receipts will be posted no later than Valentine's Day, which of course is today. In fact, we post our actions to the Doge handle on X and to the Doge website, said Elon Musk. So all of our actions are maximally transparent. In fact, I don't know of a case where an organization has been more transparent than the Doge organization. So you can keep that in mind, doge.gov. Let's take a short break. We'll read your comments, and we only got less than a half an hour left, so keep those comments coming in. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Thank you for joining us. Let's go to some viewer comments. And there are so many this morning. Everybody's talkative, having a great Friday morning, and I appreciate it. First up, Trump and Elon are turning off the spigot of corrupt cash that has funded Democrat causes and campaigns for many years. I could foresee a period of Republican dominance for years if the election process is honest and the true majority is represented. Thank you, Fred. Comment from a different viewer. Do you think that if Ross Perot, had been given a position in government cabinet after his run for presidency, the government would have learned from a successful businessman, and Trump may be taken more positively? Boy, that's a good question. I don't see a scenario where anybody would have put Ross Perot in that situation, but that's something to think about. If he would have maybe accomplished some of the things that he was hoping to accomplish, that maybe there would be more positivity at first for Trump. That's a really interesting point. Thank you. Good morning, Frank. Well, hey, good morning. An earlier comment from a viewer reminded me about possible slander or defamation when I heard of a statement that Trump had a $400 million deal with Tesla that was actually from the Biden administration, who purchased the Tesla EV armored vehicles. But can these people be sued for slander and shut down the misinformation that they always squawk about? Otherwise, angry face. That's a good point. I know that Trump, back in his first term, had talked about kind of changing the rules for slander and libel and making it, because right now public figures, and especially like Trump, really anything can be said about him and not much repercussion. I know it received some pushback, and some people in the media were furious about it, suggesting it was an attack on free speech. I'm not sure whatever came from that, but I could understand if we saw Trump pushing that again and soon, because of some of the things that is being reported in the media. Comment from a viewer: isn't it ironic that Hochul and James are trying to stop ICE? They can't help New York homeless who are citizens, but chose to uphold illegals that have no right to be here. Yes, Hochul is in a little bit of hot water. She canceled that luncheon with Trump, trying to get her footing to be prepared for how these negotiations will begin. There's actually a piece, and I don't see a scenario where we get to it, but the New York Post editorial board saying it's not an all-out U.S. versus New York war yet, but the state must help with Trump's immigration crackdown. So maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But I think now they're pushing back even further. But it should come as no surprise, even though they were talking about Pam Bondi just trying to do this for publicity, when you have both, ironically, Hochul and James giving that press conference the day after the election, basically saying that they're not going to work with Trump. Democrat Representative Maxwell Frost was on CNN, and he says that Doge is illegal and unconstitutional. He said, I think we need to be doing a lot more oversight in terms of what Doge is doing. And that's a part of the reason that a lot of my Democrat colleagues and I actually had to go to a lot of these institutions and departments over the past week. We've been to USAID, we've been to the Department of Education, the Department of Treasury, because we reach out to the administration. What we're getting back is crickets. As I speak with a lot of my colleagues who have been in Congress for a long time, this is completely abnormal. Who have been in Congress for a very long time. So you're saying it's not as Washington normally does things. It's abnormal because it's not Washington as usual, which, if I'm not mistaken, was essentially the campaign message of Donald Trump. So didn't you just prove the point? But continuing, we should all be concerned about the fact that Elon Musk and his small team of Doge, coders, have absolutely zero oversight. There's no one looking over their shoulder and at their work and what they're doing to make sure that, of course, there's no conflict of interest, but it's also being done in the right way. The president needs to cease this entire Doge operation if he wants to make drastic cuts to the federal government. If he wants to move forward with this Project 2025 agenda, he needs to come to the United States Congress. Again, overhyped this Project 2025. It's as that one commentator said, they shouldn't have been worried about Project 2025. They should have been focusing on Agenda 47, which Trump made very clear, which is to cut the government. So he's complaining that it's not Washington as Washington normally does, and saying so in his statement. Jamie Raskins, the representative from Maryland, says whoever is left within the vague hemisphere of Trump who believes in the rule of law will not be able to last because they put corruption first. They are the corruption party at this point, meaning Republicans. They've wiped out the inspector generals. They fired 17 of them illegally without notifying Congress. They have to come to us 30 days before they have to specifically set forth the rationale for getting rid of the inspector generals, who are their anti-corrupt fighters in each agency and department. Excuse me. Now I lost my spot. So despite all the phony rhetoric about how Elon Musk is fighting corruption, they're wiping out the whole infrastructure of anti-corruption fighters. It's all about partisan weaponization, and it fits their executive theory that everybody in the executive branch of government, including now members of independent boards and agencies like the Federal Election Commission and the National Labor Relations Board, work directly for Donald Trump, and he can fire them for whatever reason he wants. They have to take political orders from him. This administration stands for corruption. And what Elon Musk is doing in Washington is all about expanding corruption. And he's not the enemy of corruption. He's the agent of corruption. Boy, they're concerned when you start talking about government bureaucracies and taxpaying dollars being cut. As a matter of fact, Chuck Schumer is even reported as saying, I'm getting more and more furious. They want us to beat Trump and stop this, we'll say, garbage. And that's what we're doing, said Chuck Schumer. Now, I had mentioned after that protest that Chuck Schumer was involved in, where he said, we're going to win. A lot of people in the Democrat Party started saying he's embarrassing. So he's trying to recalibrate how to take on Trump. It hasn't worked thus far. And it hasn't worked at the House level either, or in the media. But now he's trying to kind of rebrand himself, perhaps is the term that we're looking for. And this is a whole piece by the New York Times showing how he's rebranding himself. So anyway, that's Chuck Schumer. When we come back, a couple things here about some more cuts in the government, and we'll try to rush through as much as we can because we are running a little bit late and we're almost out of time on this Valentine's Day edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you for joining us so far. Keep those comments coming in. We'll be right back. The Frankly Speaking Roof Camp, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We do have to take another break here in just a moment as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio, but let's go through some viewer comments first. Where was Raskin during the corruption of the Biden administration? Good point. Silent. Defending Biden. Wasn't he one of the ones that said Biden was sharp as a tack, too? Comment from a different viewer. The Democrats' ancient leaders disparaged young people as stupid and untrustworthy. Yes, they did voting-wise, and they did in their own leadership. Now, whatever you think about AOC, Pelosi made moves to make sure that she did not get in a leadership position. They don't want to see the fresh blood and the fresh ideas. That's why Chuck Schumer is rebranding and changing directions, because he is being seen as out of touch and a kind of an old way of doing politics, and it's just not working. It's falling flat. So a lot of people that are younger are starting to criticize him. Well, he doesn't want to lose that power. He's had that power for how long? And he's, I'm sure, going to run for re-election forever. So I think he's trying to rebrand to stay cool and hip. And what normally happens when someone of an older generation tries to do that to relate to young people, it normally doesn't go well, but Chuck Schumer is going to give it a shot anyway. Comment from a different viewer. The Doge team is a breath of fresh air. Thank you very much. Now, EPA head Lee Zeldin has revealed that there was no real oversight of that $20 billion that the Biden administration funneled through Citibank, and he said it's just the tip of the iceberg. Joe Biden's EPA parked $20 billion at the Financial Institute, which the Post has learned is Citibank, as part of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. But the awardees weren't announced until August of 2024, and Citibank not brought it until September, after Biden's disastrous June debate performance led him to withdrawal, making the race completely different. Zeldin's team is looking into whether former EPA employees are working at any of the grantees, which include the Opportunity Financing Network, receiving $2.29 billion, where Vice President Laura Silverman says she brings economic, financial, and social justice to communities, and the native CDFI networks $400 million, which has featured Senator Elizabeth Warren as a speaker. The list goes on and on. You can find it here, find it at the New York Post. But this is obviously kind of a way out the door to use that Inflation Reduction Act money to continue to work towards their causes that were proved so unpopular, and why Donald Trump became the one in the landslide, I should say. So they wanted to make sure they could still work behind the scenes as best as they could. Linda McMahon outlined her plans yesterday to dismantle the Department of Education, even though she faced taunting at the confirmation hearing. Did you see that? Because, of course, of her connection with WWE, she was receiving WWE taunting. One protester or one heckler yelling at one point, "Can you hear what Linda McMahon is cooking? It's a world without idea," meaning Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now, that is a reference to Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's catchphrase, if you're not familiar. But she is head of the Department of Education. She said, "We'd like to make sure that we are presenting a plan that I think our senators could get on board with and our Congress could get on board with, that would have a better functioning Department of Education." Adding that eliminating it certainly does require congressional action. Now, Trump has said in the past that her job as the head of the Department of Education is to put herself out of a job. All right, folks, we're going to take our last break, and then we are going to breeze through the stories that we have not had an opportunity to mention. So get your last minute questions in right now, or not questions, I should say comments, because we've had so many comments this morning. So as we prepare for the weekend, get everything out of your system, like I'm trying to do here too. And then we will be back on Monday, though. I just wanted to highlight that. I know it's President's Day, so if you have President's Day off, still set your alarm, please, and tune in, because we're going to be here for President's Day. Stay with us. We'll be right back with our last segment of Frankly Speaking on this Friday morning edition. Stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson Studio on Market Street in Corning. Let's go to some viewer comments as we wrap up today's edition. I had never heard of Iron Mountain until recently seeing a report, and it was amazing to me and like a far-fetched backward story. I agree. When I heard, and if you're wondering what we're talking about, that is the limestone mine where government employees' retirements are handwritten on paper, done on paper with ink, and put in boxes in a limestone cave, and depending on how many people can retire years, how fast the mine shaft will work. When Elon Musk had mentioned that, and it's called Iron Mountains in Pennsylvania, I thought he was just making some far-fetched stories, doing kind of a Muskism, and I thought, what is that even about? So to see that report that is an actual thing goes to show you how wacky things can be in the government. How much more are we going to learn? So yes, thank you. We're gonna change the language on this a little bit, but I'm gonna get the same point across. The old timers in Washington need to retire. Time for change. Happy Valentine's Day, Frank. Well, happy Valentine's to you as well. I think both parties are really talking about that. And I think it was kind of pushed forward a little bit quicker because of obviously Biden's performance, and that we were told that he could handle another 4 years. And then you see, Mitch McConnell freezing up and some of the health issues he's had. And then you see a Pelosi who's still somehow have this, and Chuck Schumer, that have these power positions where they can decide who gets leadership, and it's not the young people. You're right. I think both parties are saying that. All right, comment from Ken in Horseheads. Hochul and James are working to install the framework to allow the ultimate goal that the Democrats have for the illegal immigrants, that they urge to enter the country illegally. Get them driver's license and make sure it is against the law to ask about citizenship. Then make sure they know while illegal, no one can stop them from registering and voting. And magically, the country has more Democrat voters. Thanks, Ken. And that is in reference to a couple things that we talked about. Of course, that's the DOJ lawsuit Pam Bondi's lawsuit against New York Governor Hochul and Letitia James, as well as the head of the DMV. But you also mentioned telling illegal immigrants that no one can stop them. That happened with AOC sharing tips on how illegal immigrants can evade ICE and do not open the door. This is receiving some pushback from even her constituents, advocating, to make sure how everyone can protect themselves from ICE. Okay. Oh, by the way, HHS splurged more than $22 billion on grants for migrants, including cash for cars, home loans, and startups. The Department of Health and Human Services ramped up grants for migrants from 2020 to 2024. What were those years? Which includes cash assistance to buy cars, homes, and even build credit for startup businesses, according to a shocking watchdog report that found taxpayers were left on the hook. This was breaking yesterday for $22.6 billion. $22.6 billion. The Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement handed out the high sum to a host of nonprofits, effectively acting as a giant magnet for those crossing the border. So that was breaking from that watchdog yesterday. By the way, the House GOP advances the framework for Trump's, as he calls it, big, beautiful tax and border bill amid delays and some division. It is now cleared committee in a 21-16 vote. Republicans intend to wrangle the blueprint through the House of Representatives after returning from next week's recess, putting them more or less back on track with leadership's timeline of passing it by the end of the month. Just a day before advancing it, the House Budget Committee Chairman, Jody Arrington, rolled out a budget resolution, which is required to unlock the process Republicans need to successfully pass Trump's, quote, big, beautiful agenda. So back on track after it moved on from that committee. Representative Chip Roy, who can be troublesome sometimes. This budget put forward by the chairman is a giant step forward to reducing spending. The primary driver of the inflation and the expansion of the government that is strangling the future of our children and grandchildren. I'm proud of what the chairman has put forward. This is when I always get tongue-tied when I try to go through too many. Illegal border crossings hit a record low after Trump's swift crackdown. As a matter of fact, it is said it could be levels not seen in 60 years. You can almost hear a pin drop at the border. We are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you for everyone who sent in comments. Thank you to everyone who waved. We really do appreciate it. I hope you have a great Valentine's Day. And if you are off, I hope that you'll join us on President's Day on Monday. And we'll tell you to have a good President's Day on Monday as well. So please join us every weekday morning starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thanks again for everything. And we'll be back Monday morning right here on Big Fox.